was a descendant of the Prophet, and thus he had sort of religious credentials. He had Arab nationalist credentials in the sense that he was a leader of a revolt against the Ottomans in the name of Arabism. Generally speaking, he was considered to be quite moderate and willing to accommodate British interest.
In August 1921, Faisal was elected King of Iraq, following a somewhat dubious referendum. The Hashemite monarchy was regarded with suspicion by many Iraqis.
The real problem here was the monarchy was seen as sort of a tool of the British, and it was the mandate itself that generated the opposition.
British overall control could not prevent King Faisal from leading Iraq towards greater freedom. At his urging, Iraq was admitted to the League of Nations as an independent state in October 1932. Nevertheless, in the late 1940s, many Iraqis were voicing dissatisfaction with the pro-British regime. It seemed to them that Faisal was becoming increasingly distanced from Iraqi society.
Peasants were being driven off the land because they couldn't pay the loans that they had borrowed. So landlessness was increasing. The situation in the countryside was one of intense poverty.
The presence of oil exacerbated the class divisions within the society. Oil had originally been discovered in the city of Kirkuk in 1927.
It allowed the government to enjoy a source of wealth that was not dependent on society. It didn't have to pay any attention to taxpayers and their wishes. There was the entire budget of the Iraqi government right from the ground, so it was not accountable to anybody, and this caused it to grow in arrogance and in isolation.
Inequality and poverty intensified Arab nationalism and anti-Western sentiment.
You get the rise of ideologies, and more specifically Marxism, Leninism, that begins to influence those people who are struggling against colonialism and imperial control.
The Iraqi ruling family clung to the trappings of the past. On the 2nd of May 1953, 18-year-old Faisal II, educated at Harrow, assumed the throne.
Surrounded by senators, deputies, and members of foreign delegations, he took the oath of kingship.
In 1956, Iraq signed the Baghdad Pact, an anti-communist security alliance that included Great Britain, Turkey, Pakistan, and Iran. That year, Faisal paid a state visit to Britain and affirmed his government's enduring friendship. Two years later, the king and his entire household would be assassinated.
Once you uncork the bottle, all sorts of things come out.
In the late 1950s, nationalist fervor gripped Iraq. Determined to put an end to the monarchy, a group called the Free Officers Association mounted a coup d'etat against Faisal on the 14th of July, 1958.
Explosive news from the Middle East. A military coup and mob revolt in Iraq topples King Faisal from the throne.
It was all over within hours. A bloody massacre at Al-Zuhur Palace left the 23-year-old king dead.
They tore him to pieces, they mutilated his body, they cut his feet off, they cut his head off, his hands, and then they hanged him for everyone to see.
The 1958 revolution was quite violent. It wasn't meant to be. The officers that conducted it wanted to get rid of the ruling family, and the ruling family was killed. But as frequently happens, once you uncork the bottle, all sorts of things come out.
The leader of the revolution, General Abdul Karim Qasim, became Prime Minister of the new Republic of Iraq.
Our revolution is a real reaction against tyranny and corruption. Our foreign policy is to work for peace and cooperate with the other nations. We are friendly to all peace-loving nations on the basis of mutual interest.
Some of Qasim's progressive legislation, especially that which promoted women's rights and land reform, was considered too radical by many Iraqis. They began to support the right-wing Ba'ath Party that emerged in the early 1950s.
All the forces that feared the leftist tide in Iraq gravitated toward the most militant, the most organized, the most vicious of the right-wing groups, which was the Ba'ath Party.
The storied city of Baghdad, capital of Iraq, has been the scene once more of bloody revolt that has seated a new government.
On the 8th of February 1963, a coalition force of right-wing Ba'ath Party supporters and nationalist army officers staged a coup to overthrow Qasim. "24 hours later, he was executed. A former instigator with Qasim of the 1958 revolution, Colonel Abdul Salam Arif, assumed the presidency. Following the coup, Arif and his Arab nationalist supporters in the army outmaneuvered the Ba'ath faction to take complete control of the government. But the Ba'ath Party did not go away. In fact, it grew stronger by recruiting new members from the conservative right and extending its reach deeper into the core of senior army officers.
The man who was responsible for doing this was Saddam Hussein, who was really responsible for organization, including not only the cell structure, but the security organization.
On the 13th of April, 1966, Colonel Abdul Salam Arif was killed in a helicopter crash. He was succeeded by his brother, Abdul Rahman, a weak man unskilled in military politics. On the 17th of July, 1968, the Baathists took advantage of Abdul Rahman's ineffectual leadership. They staged a bloodless coup that sent him into exile. 54-year-old General Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr became president of the newly established Revolutionary Command Council, Iraq's supreme executive, legislative, and judicial body. Al-Bakr's vice chairman and second in command was Saddam Hussein.
He was raised by his uncle, who was a staunch Arab nationalist, and who fed him this outlook. We hear stories that he was sort of a village bully, that he carried a pistol around with him, and there are those who say he even killed someone when he was still a child.
Saddam was in charge of internal security. His chief task was to eliminate any opposition to the Ba'ath government or to himself.
For a long time, the Baathists depended on elements within the military to stabilize their rule. Saddam built a new base for the party, and this was the secret police. The secret police spread an atmosphere of terror in Iraq, where everybody feared their neighbor, and even parents feared their own children.
Over the following 10 years, al-Bakr and Saddam Hussein moved the country inexorably towards totalitarianism. After a decade of the purging of political opposition, manipulation of the different ethnic groups, and consolidation of his power base, Saddam had gained practical control of the administration.